today, well, I'm calling it Becoming More Ourselves. So this is my particular, I'm going to be coming at this kind of direction, which is a little bit different. I'll explain why I think it's a little bit of a different direction in becoming a true individual. And in the past few weeks, we've been exploring this. And if you think about becoming a true individual, it seems like becoming somebody who we're not really quite yet. It's like we're becoming maybe a very slightly different person. You could say becoming a true individual. We're here, the true individual is over there. We're becoming a true individual. But if we look at the process of spiritual development in a somewhat different aspect of becoming more ourselves, it's rather a different idea. And as I talk, maybe we'll see there's actually not too much difference between the two, but there certainly seems to be coming at it from a somewhat different angle. So Sandor Rachel, I mean, he coined this term true individual probably 40 or 50 years ago, and he equated the true individual with somebody who'd broken 3 fetters. Or it explains too much, but it means somebody who's irreversibly on the path to enlightenment, somebody who's had profound insight and has, you could say, entered the stream of the Dharma. They're irreversibly on the progress towards enlightenment, and enlightenment is assured at some future time. Now, this idea of becoming one of these kind of people, it fits in with you could say the myth of self-development. Like in a minute, I'm going to talk about a number of different myths which are currently being talked about, have been advertised in our movement by some of the senior figures. So the idea of becoming a true individual, we're over here, the true individual's over here. It works quite well with this myth of self-development. So we here, and if we develop ourselves, we become this true individual sooner or later. Well, that's not the only way of thinking about the spiritual life. So just as a bit of an opening to my talk, I'm just going to mention these different myths which are being talked about. And in fact, what's his name, Jnana, our president, he's currently giving talks at the LBC London Buddhist Centre on this theme at the moment. So I'm just going to give a very brief outline of these different myths, and we'll see how they may relate to the idea of becoming more ourselves. The reason why I'm doing this is that I think it's quite important for us to have kind of an inspiring myth, something which sort of encapsulates something of the nature of the path, which we can sort of get on board with. So maybe if I mention some of these different myths, and maybe you'll find one or more of them quite attractive and potentially inspiring. So we start off with the one which I've just mentioned, which is the myth of a path, I would say, of self-development. So we practice to develop good qualities, becoming more ethical, becoming more mindful, becoming more caring, and eradicating certain unhelpful characteristics. And Buddhist practice definitely can be seen in this light. We're over here, we want to get over there. So we practice good qualities. We practice meditation, we practice ethics, we practice friendship, and we can see that over a period of time we sort of become transformed to some degree. We can call this this self-development myth, we could say self-transformation or self-transcendence even. So that's the one that's the myth which is very prevalent in our movement. That's a lot of how Triratna has been formed and how it often talks about is along these lines: self-development, we're here, we want to go over there. So that fits quite well with becoming a true individual. True individual is over here, and we're over here just now. Now we've got some other myths which are kind of complementary ideas of how to think about the spiritual path. Because each of these myths, they haven't got the whole story, but you can't have the whole story in words. But if you have a different angles on the spiritual path, you get a more richer and more complete take on the spiritual life, and maybe some of the shortcomings of a more literal approach in relation to one or more of these myths is going to be some degree mitigated by having different approaches to spiritual life. So another approach, another myth, is this myth of self-discovery. So this it comes at it from a different perspective. And one way of looking at this one is that we have, through practice, we remove what gets in the way. So we remove what gets in the way from what gets in the way of our pure and true nature coming to the fore. So if we practice to remove hatred, for example, then we're going to help to reveal something more of our true nature, possibly in the area of loving kindness, for example. And if we remove or help to practice to remove a tendency towards unmindfulness by practicing mindfulness, then that's going to help our true being, you could say, to come to the fore. So these veils, which this self-development myth sort of talks about, you could say, that they relate to negative emotions, unhelpful ideas, and deeply held assumptions. And these are the things which get in the way of allowing our pure and true nature coming to the fore. So this is how it talks of self-discovery. So we get rid of these veils, these things which we by habitually and probably rather unconsciously create. And these are veils which obscure our true nature. So that's one way of talking about the spiritual life is to undo rather than create, and sort of undo unhelpful obscurations, you could say. And I think we could look at becoming more ourselves in this light. So if we don't do if we sort of stop doing what's unhelpful, we can then become more ourselves by allowing this pure and true nature coming to the fore and blossoming, manifesting, you could say. So that's the other direction you can think of the spiritual life. And there's one which is rather similar. This is the practice, rather the myth of emergence. So this is a little bit similar, and we could look at it in terms of we just relax, we just be. For example, we're just sitting in meditation, not trying to fabricate anything, create anything in particular. We just relax, we just be, and our true nature, pure true nature, sort of comes to the fore. So it's a little bit similar to the self-discovery model, and I think here the becoming more ourselves fits into this quite nicely. We just relax, and if we're able to do that, and particularly this thing about relaxing and just being, really requires us to have some confidence that we're doing something helpful, that we're relaxing into something, or we're allowing something of great value to emerge. So without that confidence, which we probably don't start off with in the spiritual life, this kind of approach may not be too helpful. And not usually the idea of self-development is sort of advertised as being the most helpful kind of paradigm or myth for people, certainly early on in their path. But if our confidence, our shraddha, our confidence emerges and gets stronger through time, then this kind of approach may start to have some mileage for us. And then the fourth myth is that of self-surrender. So we basically give ourselves up. We sort of surrender our control, you could say, maybe to one or more of the refuges in Buddhism. This particularly might be most relevant if we have a strong relationship to a mythic figure. When you get ordained, you get one of these and an inspiring name, you quite often get initiated into a kind of a mythic figure and a visualization practice to go with that. And over a period of time, you develop quite a strong feeling for, it's like the truth or I can't really find my words, but something which this figure points to, so I start to get a strong feeling for that. And this is where the idea of self-surrender might be quite relevant. You just surrender up to the spiritual energy, which is none other than your own potential in a way, but you're surrendering up to that. Yeah, so there we are. So there's 4 different takes on the spiritual life. And it's good to have a connection with one or more of these, which we sort of find we can get on with and seem to give us some inspiration to continue. So yeah, each of these ideas, these myths, that if we take them too literally, can get in the way. And I'll just mention some of the things which have occurred to me in my relationship to these ideas. In a minute, I'll invite us to a bit of reflection along these lines. But if we're becoming a true individual, we're here, we're trying to get over there. Our ego is rather fond of that. This is rather good. We're like this, and we can become like this. And the ego might think, oh, there's some lovely qualities which I can appropriate. This is very, very good. This is very, very good news. Which may be fine in terms of helping us to motivate us to practice, but maybe a little bit of ego invested in that movement from here to there. So it's positive, but may have a bit of a downside. Then we might think about if he's thinking about becoming the true individual. Now, the true individual is talking about somebody who's a bit more, well, quite a bit more other regarding and less self-obsessed than we are. And it means we're rather less at the center of the universe than we might be now. But the ego is not very fond of that, so there may be some problems in really motivating ourselves to go that far. But then again, the qualities of the true individual appear very desirable. They're very human, because we know that in our best, we aren't self-obsessed. We actually are other regarding. We are creative. We are caring. We are tolerant. We've got all these good qualities which we know sort of deep down that we do have access to. So the true individual, you could say, has these to a greater degree than we do. So these can be an inspiration for practice. So definitely some good stuff in this movement from where we are to becoming the true individual, but there may be something getting in the way as well. So then thinking about how I responded to becoming more ourselves. It seems to be that the ego finds it a bit harder to gain purchase with this idea. It's not as if we're going from here to over there. We're sort of already here. We're going more here. What does that mean? It's a bit of a found a very, very good metaphor here, but it's not something which the ego can quite grasp in the same way as going from here to there. So the ego might have a bit of a problem with this. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it may be that there's something going on there. And we need to have some confidence that deep inside there is this wonderful being waiting to emerge. If we have some confidence in that, then the idea of becoming more ourselves, which is becoming this great being which we have the capacity for, that we are deep down. If we have some confidence in that, then becoming more ourselves might be a very attractive and a very useful myth. And yeah, I'll mention this now, that if we get some sense that we are indeed conditioned, that we get a sense that, in this particular situation, I'm a bit like my dad, or in another situation, I'm really reacting to how my mum's like this. I really want to be the opposite to that. And other ways you might see that we can be conditioned by our environment. You get a sense that we are indeed conditioned. Our maybe habitual behaviours, our patterns of behaviour are to some degree conditioned by the people we hung around with the people we grew up with, what we were taught, what our family was like, the company we keep. So it says, so then we think, well, okay, so some of our behaviours aren't really ourselves because they're conditioned. If they're conditioned, they aren't really ourselves. This really begs the question, who are we really? It's a really, really interesting question. Who am I? If we've got a sense that often what we do isn't truly ourselves because it's conditioned by our habits, who are we really? Now, for me, finding out who I am really is really, I find that a really, really inspiring myth. Who am I? I want to find out. It's a really, really good question. So becoming more ourselves is sort of along those lines of exploring who we are really. So what I'm going to suggest we do now, just for a few minutes, what I'm going to do, we'll be sitting in a reflective posture, and I'm just going to introduce the idea in the reflective space, sort of something about what becoming a true individual might mean. I'm just going to drop in a few ideas. And basically the idea is to see, how do I respond to that? What do I make of that? Is there a draw to it? Is there an aversion to it? Or whatever, is there confusion or whatever? Just trying to notice, well, when we introduce the idea, becoming a true individual, does it have an element of inspiration? Or what else does it have? Just finding what our response is. Then I'm going to invite us to reflect on becoming more ourselves, which is rather a different take on the spiritual path. And I'll just invite a few ideas about what that might mean and drop in a few ideas. Then just try and notice, well, how do I respond to that? Is there indeed a response to that? So that's what I'm going to suggest we do just for the next between 5 and 10 minutes. Maybe you'd like to sit in a posture which will allow you to at least be a bit reflective or meditative. Maybe start by just tuning into the body. This isn't an exercise in the cerebral part of our being. We're trying to notice the response of our full being, just some profound ideas about the spiritual path. Letting the mind be open and spacious. So becoming a true individual, becoming an individual who lives on the basis of their highest values. Individual who lives by their own right. They aren't dominated by the pressure of conforming to group norms. might indeed have transcended this pressure. Becoming an individual who has removed gross self-obsession. And is naturally other regarding, selfless and less selfish. We're becoming an individual who would practice the Dharma if nobody else was doing it. So now giving some attention to our response. How do we respond to this idea of becoming a true individual? Now we'll move our attention to the idea of becoming more ourselves. And with this approach, through practice, we dissolve the veils of disturbing emotions, unhelpful views and assumptions, to reveal more and more the pure being we've always been in our depths. And as we become more ourselves, our qualities start to shine more and more. And as we become more ourselves, we live life more in accordance with our highest values. And in this way, we become more authentic. Now noticing our response to the idea of becoming more ourselves. Now letting go of this practice, in a moment, I'll ring the bell at the end of this short reflection. So interesting just to get a few responses to those two ideas, the idea of becoming a true individual, how we responded to that, and becoming more ourselves, a kind of a complementary but somewhat different angle. So has anybody got anything which they sort of notice as they were reflecting on those two approaches?
I had a sense that I had a bit of a sense that I needed to do the development to have a sense of who I was as the individual before I could let it emerge. It was almost like you were saying, I don't know who I am.
Yes.
In a way. So I always had to do a bit of development.
Yes.
To then have a bit of an insight.
Yeah.
Before I could even begin to think about it.
Yes.
Letting the individual who might be in there.
Yes. Yes, and giving ourselves confidence that there is something really really valuable and pure and noble waiting to emerge. Once we've seen that we have the capacity to grow in through practice into that kind of, that sounds very close to the mark. Yeah. Anybody else with any responses to Jenny?
The first seems more unattainable. And I think in one of the earlier sessions you talked about pinnacle, kind of rising up to a pinnacle as you develop better consciousness. I didn't explain that very well, but it seems the first method you're climbing,
Yes.
and you're putting an effort to
Yes.
climb, and you're making effort, whereas the second you're more letting go of weight, so you're naturally kind of rising up without, it's more natural and if that makes any sense. Sorry.
So did that give a sense that the becoming a more ourselves model is quite an attractive one in the sense of being lifted up rather than
Yeah, it's a bit like the imagery of the lotus flower.
right? Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's a very good image for this kind of approach, becoming more ourselves. We've got the potential to be a lotus, and that sort of emerges through practice. You know.
There's one online.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
The Dharma says, giving all of oneself seems to far outshine the taking towards myself.
I didn't quite understand that, I have to say.
And I just read out what he said. I'm not quite sure I understand myself. That's what I'll ask him to elaborate.
I've got a question around giving and taking, if I could fill the space while we put in this out. Which is, to be honest, being a more giving person, I think my emotional response to that was slightly negative. It was kind of like, another thing on my list of things I, need to get done in the week, be a more giving person. But when I thought of it the other way around, a bit more like the lotus, I thought if I was a more giving person, that would probably be because I was a more spacious person. And suddenly it sounded attractive, if you like. If I was a more giving person, that would probably be because my mental state would be more open and spacious. It would giving would arise out of that.
It would be a natural follow-on, yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of thought, well, giving me in the future that's more giving would probably be really spacious. And I thought, oh, well, spacious sounds good. I like that. Yeah, it's attractive. Something I like to be, it's a sunny, rosy, attractive picture. Yeah, so the spaciousness aspect of it was attractive. Whereas the giving sounded like hard work. It's the kind of developmental model.
Yes.
Which sometimes might be a bit have mixed feelings about.
So the quality of generosity would be a natural emergence from becoming a more spacious person.
Yes. Whereas thinking of generosity in terms of it's a thing I ought to develop is, to some degree attractive because it sounds like a good idea, but it's not emotionally attractive quite so much sometimes. I mean, sometimes it is emotionally attractive, but not always.
I find it interesting. So just while you were speaking, I was reflecting that as you give in a way that you can also take, because of when you give, it generates positive emotion that you can then take from it. However, then the more I thought about that, the word taking sort of almost implies a deficit. Take something you take out, but when you give the positive emotion you get, you're generating, you take that for yourself, but then you're not leaving a space behind from what you're taking. You've just generated more positive emotion. I find that quite inspiring.
I didn't fully grasp that.
Yeah, so to give something that you obviously there's positive emotion that comes from that. That's a positive thing. So in a way you could say by giving you get to take the positive emotion. Yeah. But then I just felt that taking had this connotation that there's a space left after you take something, there's something no longer there. So so I fell away from that understanding, and as you give, it's a generative thing that I guess you take positive emotion from that. However, there's not a space left. You've just generated more positive emotion in the world. That's overall a positive thing for everyone.
So is there a bit of ego in that way of thinking, that you're taking something from sort of an altruistic?
I guess it's it depends on how you relate to it. 'Cause I feel like that sensation of the positive emotion from giving can be there, and you can come at it from the mindset of desire. I'm like, oh,
Yes.
I'm going to give lots, then I can get lots of this.
Yes.
Or you can come at it from the mindset of, yeah, I'm just going to have this and appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah.
Not coming from that sort of clinging mindset.
Yeah, we maybe have mixed motivations. As we progress through the spiritual path, our motivations are mixed, and if we just continue to do the right thing, you could say, like generosity, then over a period of time, our motivation will become purer. We just accept that we're not this perfect being to start off with, but we just keep on practicing in a sincere way, then we will iron out some of those flaws, you could say. Okay, well, thanks, Steph. We'll move on to something else. So I was thinking about becoming more ourselves, times when we've experienced ourselves as being more ourselves than we normally do. So you might think of times when we feel sort of like our normal selves, where we're reasonably comfortable, we're reasonably content. Let's say, for example, there's a job, say we're at work 9 to 5, and there's a job we quite like doing, rather than one we don't like doing. Maybe we like doing spreadsheets. I used to quite like doing spreadsheets. But it didn't have any spiritual benefit, has to be said. But it was without doubt me sort of feeling quite comfortable. I was quite comfortable and content. I was sort of being myself in quite a normal, habitual kind of way. I was sort of, just feeling, I was comfortable doing something I could do and enjoy doing. So that's ourselves being our sort of normal selves, you could say, feeling like our normal self. But there are other times when we feel more like ourselves, and there's well, I'd say when I come to Buddhist Center, I feel more like myself, which is quite an interesting thing to think about. You come to the Buddhist Center and you sort of step through the door. Within a few minutes, I feel more like myself than I am. Well, again, duff words, but it's an interesting thing to think that you can feel more yourself. So what does that mean? Maybe it's something like some new qualities are starting to emerge, or something. Maybe the situation sort of is drawing out different qualities. This can also happen on retreat. Well, it can also happen in meditation. Don't know if you get into, say, meditating, you inhabit a sort of a really positive state of mind. Do you feel like yourself? Absolutely you do. If you inhabiting a positive state of mind, you feel like yourself, and probably more so than you normally do. You're feeling more like yourself. If you go on retreat, unless you have any really bad retreat, which does happen to some people now and again, not in my experience, I have to say, but you go on retreat, and after a few days, maybe you sort of let go of something in everyday life, and you're able to sort of really enter into the retreat. And let's say the leaders ask, can you do such and such? And because you're really engaged with the retreat, you're absolutely delighted. Oh, you'll be very happy to go and do that. And you do this, and then say clean the loos or something. You're happy as Larry as you clean the loos, because you're just engaging with something sort of you engage with, you think is important, and you really want to make a contribution. And you could say maybe you're feeling like more yourself. You're maybe say more content and maybe uplifted by the possibility of just giving in these kind of situations. So it really does seem to me that if we put ourselves into certain situations which aren't necessarily the normal one, this can really help quite naturally draw out quality which help us to become, you could say, more like ourselves. As it going on retreat, coming to the Buddha Center, maybe experiences where we do feel like we're becoming more ourselves. We haven't really done too much of an effort. We just put ourselves in certain situations. There's something about Sangha settings which can really help draw out our natural self, you could say. I've seen quite a lot of nods as I've looked around the room here. So maybe this is quite a regular experience, that you can feel more like yourself when you're on retreat. So go on retreat, come to the Buddhist Center. Between the advert in now, preaching to the converted, of course. But yeah, so if you put ourselves into certain situations, we can really draw out this naturally more of ourselves than we might normally inhabit when we're at home or in our more regular everyday experiences. I want to go into groups in a minute. There's something interesting I'd like to talk about, which may be news to some of you, not news to some others. So we're talking earlier on about who am I? Who am I really? If I get rid of these conditioned behaviours, what are who are we really in our essence? And the later Buddhist tradition has got some interesting stuff to say about this. And it talks in terms of our true nature, our true pure nature, or our Dharma nature, you might say, as having the qualities of openness, clarity, and sensitivity. So I'll need to mention a bit more about what these refer to. So the first one is openness, and we might call this spaciousness. So what's being said when it's saying that these qualities are essential for us? What it means is that they're always present to some degree, but the degree to which they can be present can vary from quite mild to very profound. So with openness, let's think about is our awareness of our experience ever down to one tiny little point? Probably not. It's normally at least got a little bit of spaciousness to it, but other times you might notice that we're really quite spacious. We've got quite a broad awareness. So it does really seem that this quality of openness or spaciousness is something which is always there to some degree, but we're on a spectrum from relatively narrow. If our awareness is it's really focusing quite hard on one quite small aspect of our experience, then the openness isn't very profound, but it's not a nothing. There is a degree of spaciousness. At other times, if we practice mindfulness, for example, at some point, our awareness will naturally become more spacious. So that's one essential aspect of our being, you could say, of our consciousness, that is openness. And the second one is described as clarity, but this could also mean awareness. So if I asked you now, try and be not aware of anything. I doubt if anybody's succeeded. You just can't. You cannot. It seems, at least if we're awake. I don't know what happens when you're asleep, because I'm asleep to find out. But we're always aware of something. Whether we're mindful is another matter. But if we're being aware that we're aware is maybe it's a higher level of awareness. But we're always aware of something. We couldn't do anything. We couldn't really exist. Rather, we probably exist, but we can't really do anything without some awareness of what's going on. You can drive the car, you might get to your destination and realize you were completely unmindful for the entire journey, but somehow you got to A to B. You could only got to A to B because you were aware. So awareness is always present, even if we're not mindful. So this is what the clarity of awareness is about. So this is a really essential aspect of our being. awareness. It's always there to some degree. And the third one is described as sensitivity or responsiveness. So this is saying that whatever happens, whatever we have in our experience, we have a response to. This might be a mild response, or it might be quite a large response. But our nature is to respond to what's in our experience, whether that's an emotional response, whether it's a response of aiming to act on the basis of that. But there's always some sort of response. So, for example, in say Metabhavana, we bring people to mind. You could say we're cultivating this sensitivity and responsiveness. So yeah, we're encouraging a more sensitive, I could say a bigger emotional response, or at least a more wholesome, a more pure response. So these are said to be these three essential qualities of our true being. You could say it's openness or spaciousness, clarity and awareness, and sensitivity and responsiveness. So these are really essential qualities. And you could see all Buddhist practice as cultivating one or more of these qualities. So, for example, if you practice friendship, so you come along to the Buddhist center and you start talking to somebody, you're probably going to assume that the person you're talking to is not a complete fool, or is not a complete fool sitting up here giving a talk. So there's a measure of openness to your response. To you've taken some sort of trust they might have something useful to say. So you might naturally have a sense of openness and receptivity, you could say. So by doing that, you're cultivating this dimension of openness or spaciousness. By practicing mindfulness and breathing, you're cultivating mindfulness. So you could say you're enriching the awareness of your experience. And similarly with the Metabhavana, as I just mentioned, you're sort of cultivating this sensitivity or responsiveness. So all practice, you could say, is cultivating one or more of these dimensions of our true nature. So you could say, on that basis, that if you're practicing the Dharma, you become more yourself. Here endeth the lesson. But it's yeah, we can really see that that as well as becoming developing qualities, we're actually becoming more ourselves. We're becoming more open, becoming more aware, becoming more sensitive. And these are essential aspects of our being. These are our self at our most essential level.